The mud of the obsidian mires did not just hold you, it analyzed you. It was a thick, sentient sludge of carbon-rich mineral that felt like the desperate grip of a man who had forgotten how to drown. Vaxon Carr hated this place. He hated the way the neon mists of Xylo 4 clung to his reinforced thermal jacket, smelling of ozone and ancient, rotting data. It was a scent far too similar to the iron-scorched trenches of the Nebula Wars, where he had spent 12 years of his life perfecting the art of dismantling things that other people loved. Vaccine adjusted the strap of his heavy salvage bag. It bit into his scarred shoulder, laden with 3 canisters of filtered water and a handful of sealed nutrient cylinders he had scavenged from the wreckage of an old terraforming drone. It was 400 hours, or what passed for morning on a planet that only ever saw a spectrum of bruised violet and sickly gray twilight. The marsh was supposed to be in its low-energy state. Usually the biological rhythms of the mire settled into a subsonic hum at this hour, a safe window for a scavenger to move without triggering the predatory flora. But tonight, the silence was heavy. It was a pressure building behind his eyes, a static charge in the air that made his short, peppered beard itch. He stopped. His hand instinctively dropped to the handle of the void edge, a kinetic blade strapped to his thigh. To his left, the stagnant water, usually a black mirror of obsidian dust, began to pulse. It was the vein rise. "Damn it," Vaxon whispered, his voice a gravelly rasp. The vein rise was not scheduled for another 9 cycles. Deep beneath the surface, a bioluminescent vein throbbed, turning the black water into a swirling canvas of neon teal and electric indigo. It cast long, distorted shadows against the twisted metal roots of the cypress drones. To a poet, it might have been a masterpiece. To Vaxon, it was a target marker. The protocol for a surge was simple: find high ground and wait. The light always woke the things that preferred their meat warm and screaming. But as he turned to retreat, something caught the edge of his vision. In the center of the glow, a raft of tangled, petrified roots had drifted into a clearing. Caught in a slow eddy of the current, illuminated by the ghostly pulses from the depths, lay 3 silhouettes. Vaxon hesitated. Every instinct he possessed, honed by years of surviving the worst the galaxy had to offer, told him to walk away. But he was already moving forward. The water rose to his waist, the cold seeping through his tactical trousers, biting at the old shrapnel scars on his shins. As he got closer, the details resolved, and the air left his lungs in a sharp hiss. Lupari. Even in the dim, pulsing light, the telltale silhouettes were unmistakable. The large, tufted ears that twitched instinctively, even in unconsciousness. The long, elegant limbs that seemed far too fragile for this brutal environment. The tails, thick with silver and russet fur, now matted with black mire muck, wrapped around their bodies like protective blankets. 3 women. They were sprawled across the root raft like discarded porcelain dolls. Their armor was light, articulated plating made of a ceramic organic weave that Vaxine recognized as high-tier Lupari craftsmanship, but it was scorched and jagged. These were not travelers who had taken a wrong turn. They had been hunted. He reached the edge of the raft and gripped a protruding root. The woman closest to him lay on her back. Her fur was a pale autumn russet. Her breathing was shallow, a ragged sound that vibrated in her chest. This was Leora. He didn't know her name yet, but he saw the way her hand was clamped over a jagged wound on her side, her slender fingers stained with blood that looked like liquid mercury under the teal light. Vaxon leaned in to check her pulse, his boots searching for a solid footing in the muck. For a split second, the water beneath the raft became a perfect, unmoving mirror. Vaxon froze. The reflection looking back at him was not the weary bearded scavenger in a tattered jacket. The man in the water wore the crisp, silver-trimmed uniform of a Nebula shock trooper. The lines of exhaustion were gone, replaced by a terrifying cold focus. The eyes in the water were not his tired brown. They were a piercing electric silver. They stared up at him with a predator's recognition. Vaxin recoiled, his boots slipping in the mud. He grabbed the raft with both hands to keep from falling backward into the dark soup. He blinked hard, shaking his head. When he looked again, the reflection was just a rippled distortion of his own tired face. "Get a grip, old man," he muttered to the mist. "The fumes are finally melting your brain." A soft, sharp groan broke his focus. It came from the smallest of the 3, curled into a ball near the center of the raft. Her fur was dark, almost midnight blue. This was Kiri. Her golden eyes fluttered open, wide and dilated with shock. She tried to scramble backward, but her right leg was twisted at an odd angle, pinned beneath a heavy shard of metal. She froze when she saw Vaxin looming over them, a hulking, shadowed shape against the neon haze. Her hand fumbled for a weapon that wasn't there. "If you plan to eat us," she rasped, her common tongue heavily accented and clumsy, "pick the one with less bone. I am very crunchy." Vaxin stared at her. The sheer absurdity of the statement hung in the damp air. He snorted, a short, sharp sound that was the closest he'd come to a laugh in years. "I'm a scavenger, kid, not a chef," Vaxin replied, his voice heavy with disuse. "And you look like you'd give me indigestion. Can you move?" Kiri shook her head, wincing. "Leg is not agreeing with the plan." "Nafwer." The third woman, the one with copper fur and a sharp, angular face, stirred next. This was Zenthia. She did not panic. She sat up slowly, her eyes scanning the perimeter before they even landed on Vaxin. She was a soldier. He recognized the movement instantly. The way she reached for her shoulder, where a jagged shard of metal was embedded deep in her pauldron, piercing the flesh. With a grit of her teeth that exposed sharp canines, Zenthia gripped the metal shard. "Wait," Vaxin warned, reaching out. "Don't pull it. It's plugging the artery." She ignored him. She yanked it free with a guttural snarl. The metal did not clatter when it hit the raft. Instead, as the blood welled up, the shard began to vibrate. It let out a sound, a high, piercing note that was pure and terrifying. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded like a choir holding a single, impossible note of grief. Vaxin flinched, his hands flying to his ears. The sound stabbed through his skull, dragging a memory up from the bottom of his mind. He was back on the moon of Eris 4, the orbital bombardment sirens, the sound of the atmosphere being torn open by kinetic rods, the screaming. He fell to his knees in the water, gasping. "Turn it off," he choked out. "Stop it." Zenthia looked at the shard in her hand with disgust and tossed it into the deep water. The singing stopped instantly as the metal sank. Silence rushed back in, leaving Vaxin panting. He looked up. Zenthia was clutching her bleeding shoulder, staring at him with calculating eyes. "You know that sound," she said. It wasn't a question. Her common was better than the younger ones, sharp and precise. "I know enough to know you're carrying trouble," Vaxin growled, forcing himself to stand. He wiped the mud from his trousers. "Look, I have supplies. I can leave you water and a med kit, but I can't be here. The Alabaster patrols will be miles out and—" He stopped. He looked at Leora, still unconscious and losing mercury-colored blood. He looked at Kiri's broken leg. He looked at the shadows of the Cypress drones shifting in the rising light. If he left them, the mire would eat them. Not metaphorically. The root stalkers and the toxic spores would have them within the hour. Vaxin Carr was the man who broke things. But for the last 5 years, he had been a man who fixed engines in a settlement that treated him like a ghost, just so he could send credits to a daughter on Mars who likely didn't remember his face. He was a coward who hid in a swamp, but he wasn't a monster. "Damn it," he hissed, grabbing the thick vines trailing from the front of the raft. He wrapped them around his forearms and leaned his weight forward. "We are moving, now." "We cannot walk," Zenthia said, her voice tight with pain. "I didn't ask you to walk," Vaxin snapped. "I'm going to drag this raft. You keep your eyes on the tree line. If you see movement, you scream. Understand?" Kiri nodded vigorously. "Screaming. I am very good at that." Vaxin gritted his teeth and pulled. The raft moved sluggishly at first, then began to slide over the slick surface of the water. He didn't know where he was going, only that the pulse in the water was getting stronger, and his own heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of his chest. The journey back to the stilt shack was a blur of agony and stubbornness. Vaxin's muscles screamed, but he didn't stop. He made it 40 meters before the mire decided it had been patient enough. The water to the right exploded. It wasn't a splash, it was an eruption. A mire stalker surged up from the muck, a nightmare woven from wet wood and muscle. Its serpentine body was the thickness of a fuel barrel, covered in sensory tendrils that lashed the air. It had no eyes, only a gaping maw filled with rows of serrated obsidian thorns. "Down!" Vaxin roared. He didn't calculate. He didn't think. He threw himself between the raft and the beast. He drew his void edge, thumbing the activation switch. The blade hummed with thermal energy, glowing a dull, angry orange. The stalker struck him like a battering ram. Vaccine flew backward, hitting a mangrove root with a sickening crack. The air left his lungs. The beast reared up, its tendrils sensing the heat of the wounded Lupari on the raft. "Hey, ugly!" Vaccine splashed forward, slashing the knife through the air. The thermal trail caught the creature's attention. It whipped around, abandoning the raft to focus on the new threat. It struck faster than a man could blink. A tendril lashed out, striking Vaccine in the ribs. It felt like being hit by a steel cable. He heard the tear of fabric and the wet slice of flesh. Vaccine grunted, dropping to one knee. The stalker opened its maw for the kill. He waited. He waited for the breath, the slight pause before the strike. Now, he thrust upward. The void edge sank into the soft tissue under the creature's jaw, bearing itself to the hilt. Vaccine twisted the handle and triggered the thermal overload. There was a muffled thump and a hiss of boiling steam. The creature convulsed, shrieking a sound that vibrated in the water and then collapsed backward, thrashing in its death throes. Vaccine fell back into the water, clutching his side. The water around him was turning dark, and it wasn't from the mud. "Hey!" Kiri's voice. She was dragging herself across the raft, reaching for him. Vaccine tried to stand, but his legs felt like lead. "I got it!" he wheezed. "I got it!" He didn't have it. The edges of his vision were graying out. Stronger hands grabbed him. Xanthia had pulled him toward the raft, hauling his upper body onto the wood. "Hold him!" Xanthia commanded. Then a soft light filled Vaccine's vision. Leora was awake. She had crawled over to him, her face pale, her large eyes shimmering with a liquid iridescence. She didn't speak. She placed her hands directly over the gash in his side. Vaccine flinched, expecting pain. Instead, he felt warmth. It wasn't the heat of a fire. It was the warmth of a blanket on a winter night. It was the feeling of home, a place he hadn't been in a lifetime. Fine strands of light, like glowing spiderwebs, flowed from her fingertips. They wove themselves into his flesh, knitting the skin together. Echo weave. As the light seeped into him, he felt a strange sensation in his mind. It was a brush of emotion that wasn't his own. Gratitude, fear, safety. He looked up at Leora. She was staring right at him, and for a second he felt like she had whispered his name, though her lips never moved. "Easy," she whispered, her voice melodic and steady. "Do not fight the weave." Vaccine stopped struggling. The pain dulled to a throb. "You're heavy," he mumbled, his tongue feeling thick. Leora managed a weak, tired smile. "And you are bleeding on my armor." Vaccine let out a breath that turned into a cough. He forced himself to focus. The beast was dead, but the blood in the water would attract more. "We have to go," he said, forcing himself to sit up despite Leora's protesting hand. "My shack, 2 kilometers east, high ground." The final stretch was a haze. He remembered the weight of the rope cutting into his arms. He remembered Kiri humming a strange, discordant tune to keep the rhythm. They reached the stilt shack, a corrugated metal box perched on rusted legs, just as the false dawn began to lighten the gray sky. Vaccine managed to get the winch hook attached to the raft and hauled them up onto the wooden deck. As soon as they were safe on the dry planks, the adrenaline crashed. The fumes of the Myers combined with the blood loss hit him like a hammer. He stumbled through the door of his shack, collapsing onto the floor. The last thing he saw was Leora leaning over him, her face framed by the strange glowing fog of the swamp, looking like an angel that had fallen into the mud. Consciousness returned to Vaccine in slow, confusing layers. First there was the smell. Gone was the stench of rot and sulfur. Instead the air smelled of crushed pine needles, ozone, and something sharp and sterile, like antiseptic. Second, the feeling. He was not lying on his hard, damp mattress. He was on something firm but yielding. The sheets against his skin were impossibly smooth, cool and dry. Third, the sound. Silence. Absolute, disciplined silence. Vaccine opened his eyes. He was staring at a ceiling made of interwoven living roots and polished silver metal. It looked grown, not built. Bioluminescent moss provided a soft, ambient amber light. He tried to sit up. His side felt stiff, but the searing pain was gone. "I would not do that," a voice said. Vaccine froze. He turned his head. He was in a circular room, and he was not alone. Standing around his bed, spaced at perfect intervals, were four figures. They were Lupari, but they were nothing like the refugees he had pulled from the swamp. These were warriors. They wore full suits of articulated silver armor that gleamed in the dim light. Their faces were hidden behind semi-transparent visors, but their ears, sharp and alert, twitched as he moved. They held long, double-bladed staves that hummed with quiet energy. Elite guards, the kind you only saw in the propaganda vids from the Capitol. At the foot of the bed stood a woman. She wasn't wearing a helmet. Her fur was a striking, icy silver white. Her eyes were like chips of flint, hard and unreadable. To her left, sitting on a low stool and looking vastly cleaner than before, was Kiri. Her leg was encased in a high-tech brace. She was eating a green fruit with loud, deliberate crunches. Vaxon blinked, his brain trying to bridge the gap between his mud-soaked shack and this high-tech sanctuary. "Where?" Vaxon croaked. He cleared his throat. "Where am I?" The silver-furred woman stepped forward. Her armor made no sound. "You are in the Silver Vale Enclave," she said. Her voice was cool, smooth, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I am Commander Mice." Vaxon pushed himself up on his elbows. His head spun, but he locked eyes with her. "The others, the ones I found, are they safe?" "Leora and Zenthia are being treated," Mace replied. "They are safe. Better than you, considering you lost nearly 2 liters of blood." Kiri waved a half-eaten fruit at him. "You slept for 20 hours. You snore like a malfunctioning jump drive." Vaxin ignored her. He looked at the guards. "Am I a prisoner?" Mace tilted her head slightly, assessing him. "That depends on your definition. You are a human in a hidden Lupari stronghold during a time of high tension. By logic, you should be dead." Vaxin swung his legs over the side of the bed. He was wearing loose linen trousers that were not his own. His chest was bandaged with a shimmering, translucent material. "I saved them," Vaxin said, his voice hardening. "That bought you the bed," Mace replied evenly. "And it bought you my patience. For now." She took a step closer, leaning in until her face was level with his. Up close, Vaxin saw a scar running through her left eyebrow, breaking the perfection of her features. "You are awake," Mace said, "but do not get up yet. Your body is still knitting itself together. If you fall, my guards will not catch you. We will have to carry you like a sack of grain." Kiri let out a sudden, high-pitched giggle, instantly clapping a hand over her mouth. Vaxin looked from the young scout to the stoic commander. He felt a sudden, profound exhaustion. He rubbed his face with his hand, feeling the grit of his beard. "A sack of grain," Vaxin repeated dryly. "Charming. Remind me to tip the bellboy." Mace did not smile. She simply straightened up and tapped a command onto her wrist bracer. "Rest, human," she ordered. "The High Elder wants to see you when you can walk without looking like a newborn deer. Until then, you are under the protection and the watch of the Silver Vale Guard." She turned to leave, her cape swirling silently behind her. "And Vaxin," she added, pausing at the archway. He looked up. "Thank you," she said. The words were clipped, forced out as if they tasted bitter in her mouth. But they were there. She vanished into the corridor before he could respond. Vaxin slumped back against the pillows, staring at the bioluminescent ceiling. He looked at Kiri, who was now examining the fruit core as if it held the secrets of the universe. "She likes you," Kiri said, throwing the core into a waste chute. "She only threatens to carry people she respects. Usually she just drags them." Vaxin closed his eyes. "Fantastic," he muttered. "I saved 3 foxes, and now I have a babysitter with a spear." But as he drifted back towards sleep, his hand drifted to his side. The warmth was still there. The phantom sensation of Leora's hand. The light that felt like a memory. Outside the room, the enclave hummed with life, deep beneath the obsidian mud. And far above, the vein rise continued to pulse, waiting for the man who had looked into the water and seen a stranger staring back. The air in the Silver Vale Enclave did not move like air in a human colony. There were no humming fans or recycled oxygen scrubbers. Instead, the walls themselves seemed to breathe. The temperature remained at a constant, comfortable level, regulated by the slow, rhythmic expansion of the bioluminescent moss that lined every quarter. Vaxenkar walked with a slight limp, his boots making a heavy, discordant sound against the floor of polished obsidian. Every few steps, he felt the gaze of a Lupari guard, a silver-clad shadow hovering in the periphery, staves held in a state of relaxed lethality. He found Lior in a chamber that felt more like a greenhouse than a clinic. It was filled with suspended glass spheres, each containing a different species of glowing flora. She was standing by a central basin, her russet fur glowing softly in the ambient light. She looked up as he entered, her ears swiveling forward in a gesture of recognition that Vaxen was slowly learning to interpret as a greeting. "You should be resting, Vaxen," Leora said. Her voice lacked the sharp edge of Commander Mice, carrying instead the resonance of a cello. "The echo weave I placed in your side is still settling. It requires the host to remain calm for the cellular bond to solidify. I've spent half my life on ships where calm was just a word for the 5 seconds before the decompression alarm," Vaxen replied, leaning against a pillar of living wood. "Besides, your boss wants me to see the High Elder. I figured I'd find you first." Leora turned back to the basin, her hands moving through a cloud of iridescent vapor. "You want to know why we brought you here? Not just for the debt of the blood you spilled, but why we kept you." "A human in a hidden Lupari stronghold during a Cold War?" Vaxen said, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm not a tourist, Leora. I know when I'm being sized up for a funeral or a mission. I just can't figure out which one this is." Leora paused. She stepped toward him, her movements fluid and silent. She stopped just outside his personal space, her amber eyes searching his face. "When I touched you in the mire, Vaxen, I didn't just feel your wounds. I felt the pulse. It was deep, buried under layers of scar tissue and old pain. But it was there. It was the same frequency as the obsidian heart." Vaxen frowned. "I'm a mechanic, not a mystic. I don't have a frequency. I have a bad back and a habit of surviving when I shouldn't." "Perhaps they are the same thing," she whispered. "Come, the Elder is waiting. He has not spoken to a human in 60 years. Do not be offended if he treats you like a ghost." They walked deeper into the enclave, passing through corridors that twisted like the roots of the world. Vaxen noticed that the Lupari did not use screens or keyboards. Their technology was woven into their environment. They spoke to the walls, and the walls responded with shifts in light and sound. It was a civilization that had bypassed the industrial age entirely, choosing to upgrade nature instead of replacing it. At the heart of the enclave sat the Chamber of Echoes. It was a vast domed space where the ceiling was a mosaic of translucent minerals. The light of the twin moons of Xylo 4 filtered through, casting long, pale beams across a floor that rippled like liquid. In the center of the room sat High Elder Thalrus. He was ancient, his fur turned to a brittle, snowy white, his eyes clouded by the milky veil of cataracts. He didn't look like a leader. He looked like a part of the furniture, his robes blending seamlessly into the carved throne of bonewood. Commander Mace stood at his right hand, her posture as rigid as a bayonet. "You brought the stray," Mace said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "He is not a stray, Mace," Leora said firmly. "He is the one the mire pointed to." The Elder shifted. The sound of his movement was like dry leaves skittering across stone. He lifted a hand, gestured for Vaxen to come closer. Vaxen hesitated, his hand hovering near his belt where his knife used to be, before he remembered the guards had confiscated it. He stepped forward until he was 3 feet from the old Lupari. Thalrus did not look at him with his eyes. He tilted his head, listening. "You smell of copper and regrets, Vaxenkar," the Elder rasped. His common was archaic, the vowels elongated and heavy. "And something else, something cold, something that was forged in the void between the stars." "I'm just a man, Elder," Vaxen said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I pulled your girls out of the mud because it was the right thing to do. I didn't ask for a seat at the high table." "The right thing," Thalrus repeated, a thin, dry chuckle escaping his lips. "Humans and their binary morality. You think you chose to save them. You think you chose to walk into the mire that night." Vaxen narrowed his eyes. "I'm pretty sure I remember making the decision. It involved a lot of swearing and a very heavy raft. The obsidian mires do not allow strangers to walk through them unless they are recognized," the Elder said. his voice dropping to a low hum that vibrated in Vaxon's teeth. You are an anomaly, Vaxon Carr. A key that has forgotten what door it was made to open. Tell me, do you still dream of the moon of Eris 4? The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. Vaxon's heart hammered against his ribs. He hadn't told anyone about Eris 4. Not in 10 years. Not the settlement doctors. Not the drunks at the trade ports. Not even Leora. How do you know about that? The mire remembers everything, Thalris said. It is a neural network that spans the planet. When you bled into the water, you uploaded your history, your pain, your war, your failures. They are all part of the planet's memory now. But there is a hole in your file, Vaxon. A decade of shadow where the man you were became the man you are. I retired, Vaxon snapped. I stopped being a soldier and started being a mechanic. It's not a mystery, it's a career change. He is hiding something, Mace interjected, her hand tightening on her staff. The alabaster hand is moving. They have scouts at the perimeter of the hush marsh. They are looking for the human who grounded the Vain Rise. If they find him before we understand what he is, they will burn this enclave to the ground just to see the color of his ashes. What am I to you? Vaxine asked, looking from the elder to Mice. A weapon? A bargaining chip? You are the anchor, Thalris said, his milky eyes suddenly fixing on a point just above Vaxon's head. The bridge between the living and the data. 10 years ago, a human ship crashed into the deep mire. It was a research vessel carrying something it should never have touched. You were on that ship, Vaxon. I was a shock trooper, Vaxon said. I wasn't on any research ship. I was discharged after the Nebula Wars. Your memories are a beautiful lie, the elder said softly. Leora, take him to the archives. Show him the ghost. If he is to stand with us when the alabaster hand arrives, he must first know what he is standing on. As Leora led him out of the chamber, Vaxin felt a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. He looked at his hands, the calloused, scarred hands of a man who fixed engines. He felt real. He felt the weight of his boots, the ache in his ribs, the thirst in his throat. But as he looked into a mirror-polished panel in the wall, for a split second, the reflection didn't follow his movements. The man in the glass stood perfectly still, watching him with silver eyes that knew everything he had forgotten. The archives of the Silver Veil were not filled with books or data pads. They were a forest of crystalline pillars, each one vibrating with a unique subsonic frequency. Leora led Vaxon to a secluded alcove where the pillars were a deep, bruised violet. She gestured for him to sit on a stone bench that felt unnaturally warm. What did the elder mean about my memories? Vaxon asked. The silence of the archives was oppressive, making his own voice sound like a roar. I remember my daughter. I remember the wars. I remember the day I walked into the mire 5 years ago to find a place to disappear. The mind is a fragile weaver, Vaxon, Leora said. She reached out and touched a crystalline pillar. The light within it flared, projecting a three-dimensional image into the air between them. It was a medical schematic, human, but with a series of glowing blue nodes interwoven with the nervous system. Sometimes when the trauma is too great, the mind builds a house of mirrors to protect itself. But mirrors can be broken. She tapped a command into the air. The schematic shifted, focusing on the chest cavity. In the center of the heart, where a human should have a tangle of valves and muscle, there was something else. It was a metallic, clockwork seed, its surface etched with the same runes Vaxon had seen on the Lupari shrine. This is you, Leora said quietly. Vaxon stared at the hologram. He felt a sudden, sharp pang in his chest, a phantom sensation of something cold and heavy. That's impossible. I've had medical checkups at the settlements. They would have seen whatever that is. The core seed is made of obsidian thach-an, Leora explained. It mimics the density and thermal signature of human tissue. To a standard scanner, it looks like a heart that has survived a massive trauma. It doesn't just pump your blood, Vaxon. It stores the echo. I'm not a machine, Vaxon rasped. He stood up, pacing the small alcove like a caged animal. I'm a man. I bleed. I feel pain. I have a daughter who's waiting for me to send her enough credits to finish her degree. You are both, Leora said, stepping into his path. She didn't flinch as he loomed over her. 10 years ago, you were part of a Black Ops recovery team. You weren't a shock trooper. You were the security for a corporate science vessel that found the heart of xylophore. There was an accident, an atmospheric breach. Your team was wiped out. You were dying, your chest crushed by a bulkhead. Faxon closed his eyes. A flash of memory hit him. Not a dream, but a sensory explosion. The smell of burning insulation, the sound of metal groaning, the feeling of being unable to draw a breath. He remembered a pair of hands, not human, reaching through the wreckage. The Lupari found you, Leora continued. They didn't save you out of kindness, Vaxen. They saved you because the heart had already chosen you. It had bonded with your biosignature while you were still in the crash site. If you died, the heart would have deactivated, and the planet's neural network would have collapsed. So they performed a weave that had never been attempted. They replaced your broken heart with the seed. And the memories? Vaxine asked, his voice shaking. My daughter, Megan. Is she a lie too? Leora's expression softened. She reached out, her hand hovering just inches from his chest. No, Megan is real. Your life before the crash is real. But the last 10 years? The retirement? The 5 years in the shack? Those were the Echo's way of keeping you stable. It gave you a narrative that allowed you to function while the seed integrated with your biology. You were never hiding in the swamp, Vaxen. You were being cultivated. Vaxen slammed his hand against a crystalline pillar. The archive hummed in protest. So I'm a battery, a biological hard drive for an alien planet. Everything I've done, the scavenge runs, the engine repairs, it was all just a simulation to keep the hardware running? The feelings were yours, Leora said fiercely. The choice to save us in the mire was yours. The seed provides the capacity, but it does not provide the soul. That is why the Elder calls you the anchor. You are the only thing that can ground the planet's memory without being consumed by it. A Lupari's mind is too sensitive. We would burn out in seconds. But a human mind, it is built for endurance. It is built to carry weight. A sudden chime echoed through the archives. It was a sequence of 3 sharp, discordant notes. Leora's ears flattened against her head. The perimeter, she whispered. The alabaster hand. They've breached the first layer of the mists. Vaxen felt a cold, familiar clarity wash over him. The existential crisis didn't vanish, but it took a back seat to the tactical reality. How many? Scouts report a full vanguard, Leora said, her hands already moving to activate her communication bracer. They are led by High Matron Sable. She doesn't believe in the prophecy of the anchor. She thinks you are a desecration of the holy light. She wants the seed, Vaxen. She wants to rip it out of you and use it to reset the planet, purging every non-Lupari life form. Vaxen looked at his hands again. They weren't shaking anymore. If he was a machine, he was a machine built for war. And if he was a man, he was a man who didn't like being told his life was a footnote in someone else's history. Where's my knife? Vaxen asked. Mice has it in the armory, Leora replied. But Vaxen, you are not healed. If you go out there, I've been dead for 10 years, apparently, Vaxen said, a dark, jagged smile touching his lips. I think I can handle a few zealots with spears. Besides, if I'm the only thing keeping this planet from a factory reset, I'd say I've got a pretty strong incentive to stay alive. They moved through the enclave at a run. The piece of the silver veil had shattered. Warriors were sprinting toward the heavy root doors, their silver armor clattering. Kiri was there, checking the tension on her thermal bow, her young face pale but determined. Zenthia was barking orders, her arm still in a sling, but her staff held firmly in her good hand. Commander Mice met them at the main gate. She tossed Vaxen's void edge to him. He caught it mid-air. The familiar weight of the handle grounded him. The alabaster hand has human mercenaries with them, Mice said, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the gate. Your own kind, Vaxen. They've been promised a share of the planet's resources if they help Sable purge the pollutants. They're coming for the seed. They're coming for you. Vaxen thumbed the activation switch on his knife. The orange glow reflected in the obsidian walls. I've never much liked mercenaries. They have no loyalty to the gear they're using. And you? Mace asked, her visor snapping into place. Who are you loyal to, Anchor? Vaxen looked at Leora, who was already preparing a basin of echo silk for the wounded. He looked at Kiri, who gave him a shaky but brave thumbs up. He thought of the daughter he hadn't seen in a decade, a woman who existed in a world of glass and light, unaware that her father was the heartbeat of a sentient swamp. "I'm loyal to the people who didn't let me die in a heap of scrap metal," Vaxon said. The heavy doors groaned open, revealing the neon-lit chaos of the obsidian mires. In the distance, the white-gold banners of the alabaster hand flickered like ghosts against the dark water. The war for the heart of Xylo 4 had begun, and Vaxon Carr was no longer just a scavenger. He was the ground wire for a world on the brink of an overload. The first volley of energy bolts hissed through the air, scorching the obsidian floor at Vaxon's feet. He didn't flinch. He stepped into the storm, the core seed in his chest beginning to pulse with a low, rhythmic hum that matched the beating of the planet itself. He wasn't just a man, and he wasn't just a machine. He was the choice between them. Vaxon charged, not as a soldier following orders, but as a man defending a home he had only just realized he possessed. The mud remembered him, the water recognized him, and for the first time in 10 years, the ghost in the machine was finally in control. The battle for the gates of the Silvervale Enclave erupted with a violence that made the very atmosphere of Xylo 4 vibrate. The alabaster hand did not fight with the fluid grace of the Silver Veil. They fought with the fanatical intensity of a cleansing fire. Their warriors wore bone-white armor that seemed to absorb the ambient light, making them look like voids in the neon haze of the swamp. Vaxon moved with a lethal economy of motion. He was heavier than the Lupari, his human anatomy designed for different stressors, but the core seed in his chest was feeding him Dota. It wasn't just a heartbeat, it was a tactical overlay. He could feel the vibrations in the mud before a mercenary's boot hit the ground. He could sense the buildup of thermal energy in a Lupari staff seconds before it discharged. "Flank right," Vaxon barked, grabbing Kiri by the shoulder and shoving her behind a pillar of petrified wood, just as a spray of magnetic slugs chewed through the air where she had been standing. "How did you see that?" Kiri gasped, already knocking an arrow to her bow. "I didn't see it! I felt it!" Vaxon yelled back, parrying a strike from a white-clad vanguard. He stepped into the Lupari's guard, slammed his elbow into the visor of the bone-white helmet, and followed up with a precise thrust of his void edge. The kinetic blade hummed as it bypassed the energy shield, finding the gap in the armor. The warrior fell without a sound, their body dissolving into a fine white ash that was immediately absorbed by the mire. "They're using echo siphons," Zenthia shouted from the upper ridge. She pointed to a series of metallic towers that the alabaster hand had deployed in the shallow water. The towers were glowing with a sickly violet light, pulling the bioluminescence out of the surrounding trees and roots. As the light was drained, the enclave's defensive walls began to flicker and sag. The living roots that formed the structural supports were turning brittle, graying at the edges as their life force was sucked away. "If those towers stay up, the enclave will collapse on top of us," Mace shouted, her staff a silver blur as she held back 3 attackers at once. "Vaxon, the siphons are calibrated to Lupari biorhythms. We can't get near them without our own echo being drained. But you—" "I'm the insulator," Vaxon realized. He looked at the nearest tower, located 50 meters out in the middle of a killing zone. "Cover me. I'm going to go turn off the lights." "You'll be a target for every mercenary out there," Leora cried out, her hands glowing as she struggled to keep a fallen warrior's wounds closed while the siphons pulled at her energy. "Then tell them to aim better," Vaxon roared. He lunged from the cover of the enclave, his boots splashing through the electrified water. The mercenaries, mostly humans in heavy X suits, saw him immediately. They opened fire, the red tracers of their slug throwers cutting through the indigo mist. Vaxon didn't run in a straight line. He moved like the water Mace had told him about, yielding, flowing, never standing where the blow was meant to land. He felt the core seed thrumming, a deep, resonant bass note that seemed to push back against the siphon's pull. To the towers, he was a dead zone, a black hole in the planetary network that they couldn't grasp. He reached the first tower. It was a jagged spike of cold iron, humming with a sound that made his teeth ache. Vaxon didn't look for a control panel. He grabbed the central cooling coil with his bare hands. The feedback was instantaneous. A surge of raw, unfiltered planetary memory slammed into his mind. He wasn't in the swamp anymore. He was standing in a field of glass towers under a scorching sun. He was holding a child's hand. He was watching a ship launch into a void that smelled of ozone and hope. "Stay with me, Megan," a voice whispered in his head. "I'm building this for you." Vaxon screamed, his muscles locking, his skin beginning to glow with a terrifying violet light. He felt the seed in his chest heat up, vibrating so hard he thought his ribs would shatter. Ground it! Thoris's voice echoed in the archives of his mind. Be the stone, Vaxon. Let the memory pass through you. Do not hold it. Vaxon gritted his teeth, his vision turning white. He didn't pull away. He leaned into the tower, forcing the energy down through his legs, down through his boots, and into the mud. He made himself the bridge. The siphon tower shuddered. The violet light flared once, twice, and then shattered. The metal turned to slag, melting into the water with a hiss of steam. Vaxon collapsed into the muck, gasping for air. His hands were blistered, the fabric of his sleeves scorched away. But as he looked back at the enclave, the walls were glowing with renewed strength. The green moss was pulsing, the roots tightening. One down, Vaxon wheezed, pushing himself up. 3 to go. He looked toward the next tower, but his path was blocked. Standing in the mist, her white gold armor shimmering with a divine light, was High Matron Sable. She held a staff that looked like it was carved from a single piece of frozen lightning. The anchor has a crack in it, Sable said, her voice amplified by the moisture in the air. You are a fascinating relic, human, but relics belong in museums, or in the ground. She raised her staff, and the water around Vaxon began to boil. I'm not a relic, Vaxon said, his hand finding the hilt of his knife. I'm the guy who's going to make sure your story doesn't have an ending. As the two of them locked eyes in the heart of the storm, the core seed gave one final, heavy thump. It wasn't a tactical update this time. It was a feeling, a choice. He wasn't fighting for a planet. He was fighting for the people who were holding the line behind him. And in the dark, cold void of Xylo 4, that was the only light that mattered. The water in the caldera did not just boil, it screamed. As High Matron Sable raised her lightning-etched staff, the atmospheric pressure around the Silvervale enclave plummeted, creating a localized vacuum that sucked the oxygen right out of Vaxon's lungs. He felt the core seed in his chest stutter. It was a rhythmic, mechanical hitch that sent a jolt of ice through his veins. This was not just a battle, it was a reclamation. Sable was not trying to kill him yet. She was trying to recalibrate him. You speak of stories and endings, human, Sable's voice boomed, cutting through the thunder of the echo siphons. But you are merely a sentence in a book written by your masters. You think the Aegis Horizon Corporation left you here by accident? You think they forgot their most expensive piece of hardware? Vaxon pushed himself up from the muck, his void edge humming a low, desperate tune. I don't know who Aegis Horizon is, he lied, though the name tasted like copper and old blood in his mouth. And I don't care about your hardware. I'm the guy who's going to put a hole in that fancy armor of yours. Sable laughed, a sound like glass grinding against stone. She signaled to the shadows behind her. A group of human mercenaries clad in matte black Aegis tactical gear stepped forward. They didn't move like the fanatical Lupari warriors. They moved with the cold, bored precision of professionals. At their head was a man whose face was a patchwork of burned scars and cybernetic plates. Vaxon's heart, the real one, or what was left of it, stopped. Silas? Vaxon whispered. The mercenary leader raised his visor. His remaining eye was a dull, synthetic red that hummed as it focused on Vaxon's chest. Long time, Carr. Aegis said you were dead. Then they said you were a long-term asset on a deep cover mission. I see you've gone native. Silas, listen to me, Vaxon said, taking a cautious step forward, his hands open. These people, the Silver Veil, they're not the enemy. Sable is going to overload the planet. She's going to kill everyone, including your team. Business is business, Vaxon, Silas replied, his voice a flat, synthesized drone. Aegis wants the seed, Sable wants the purge. As long as the credits clear, I don't care if the trees start singing the national anthem. Now make this easy. Shut down the anchor, and maybe I can convince them to let you keep your head. The betrayal cut deeper than the Mire-stalker's claws. Silas Thorne had been Vaxon's sergeant during the Nebula Wars. They had shared rations, oxygen tanks, and the weight of 100 dead comrades. To see him here, standing beside a fanatic who wanted to commit planetary genocide, was a test of a bond Vaxon had held as sacred for 20 years. I can't do that, Silas, Vaxon said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Then you're just scrap, Silas said. He leveled his heavy magnetic slug thrower. Fire! The world dissolved into fire. The Aegis mercenaries unleashed a barrage of high-velocity projectiles that shredded the living roots of the Enclave. The Silver Veil warriors retaliated with arcs of thermal energy, but they were being pushed back. The Echo siphons were doing their work, draining the bioluminescent strength of the Lupari defenders. Vaxen dove behind a fallen cypress drone, the slugs whistling over his head. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Zenthia. Her copper fur was singed, and her eyes were wide with a mix of fury and fear. "He is your kin," Zenthia hissed, pointing at Silas. "The one with the metal face. Why does he hunt you?" "Because he's a soldier who never learned how to stop taking orders," Vaxen said, checking the charge on his void edge. "He's not my kin, Zenthia. Not anymore." "Your species is a plague of contradictions," Zenthia spat, but she didn't move away. She stood beside him, her staff glowing with a fading orange light. "They say humans are defined by their greed. But you are defined by your debts. Which one will you pay today?" Vaxen looked at her. He saw the scars on her shoulder, the ones he had helped heal. He looked back at the Enclave, where Leora and Kiri were retreating deeper into the sublevels. He looked at Silas, the ghost of his past. "I'm paying the one that keeps the lights on," Vaxen said. He launched himself from cover, not toward Silas, but toward the central siphon tower that Sable was guarding. He was the only one who could get close to it. The core seed was vibrating now, a constant, violent thrum that felt like it was trying to beat its way out of his sternum. Every step he took toward the tower made the pressure worse. It wasn't just physical, it was a sensory overload. The seed was pulling in the data of the battle, the fear of the dying warriors, the cold greed of the mercenaries, the fanatical joy of Sable. "You cannot ground the whole world, Anchor!" Sable screamed, swinging her lightning staff. A bolt of raw energy struck the ground at Vaxen's feet, throwing him into the air. He hit the water hard, his vision swimming. He felt a presence in his mind, the obsidian heart of Xylo 4. It was cold, ancient, and utterly indifferent to his suffering. It wanted to be free. It wanted to use him as a vent for all the compressed memory it had stored for millennia. "Vaxen," a voice whispered in his ear. It wasn't Leora or Thalris. It was a voice from a dream. "Dad, please come home. The spires are so high." "Megan." Vaxen gasped, his hand clawing at the mud. He remembered the credits he had sent every month. He remembered the letters he had written that were never answered. "She's not there, Carr." Silas's voice boomed over the comms. He was moving in, his heavy boots splashing through the water. "Megan isn't on Mars. She never was. Aegis created the simulation to keep you compliant. The daughter is just an AI subroutine designed to give you something to live for. You've been sending credits to a corporate slush fund for 10 years. The world went silent. The sound of the gunfire, the screams of the Lupari, the roar of the siphons, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. Vaxen stared at his reflection in the dark water. The man with the silver eyes looked back, but he wasn't a predator anymore. He looked hollow. Everything was a lie. His retirement, his peace, his purpose. He was a ghost being haunted by a computer program. "Is it true?" Vaxen whispered, his voice cracking. "Does it matter?" Sable asked, looming over him. She raised her staff for the final blow. "You were born in a lab, perfected in a war, and sacrificed to a swamp. Your existence is a series of errors that I am about to correct." Vaxen looked up at her. He felt the weight of the lie, the crushing realization that he had no one left in the galaxy who carried his blood. He was alone. He was a machine that had been taught to dream of a family that didn't exist. But then he felt a pull on his wrist, the Meyer thread band. It was still there, pulsing with a faint, steady light. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't the rhythmic hum of the seed. It was the frequency of a heart. "I am a healer," Sarah's voice echoed in his mind. "I keep things together. That includes you." Vaxen's fingers curled into the mud. The emptiness didn't vanish, but it was replaced by something else. A choice. If his blood family was a lie, then the family he had chosen in the muck, the russet healer, the mischievous scout, the stubborn commander, was the only truth he had left. "You're right, Sable," Vaxen said, his voice low and steady. He stood up, the core seed in his chest igniting with a blinding blue light. I am a series of errors. He grabbed the lightning staff as it descended, the energy searing his palms. He didn't flinch. And I'm the biggest error you've ever made. He slammed his forehead into Sable's visor, the ceramic shattering. As she stumbled back, Vaxin turned toward the siphon tower. He didn't just touch it this time, he embraced it. He let the seed open wide, pulling every bit of energy, every memory, every bit of data into himself. He wasn't the ground wire anymore. He was the surge. The siphon tower groaned, its metal frame twisting under the strain of the feedback. The violet light turned to a screaming white. Around the caldera, the other towers began to crack, their energy diverted into Vaxin's chest. Silas, stop him! Sable shrieked, clutching her face. Silas raised his slug thrower, his synthetic eye flickering red. He looked at Vaxin, the man who was literally glowing with the power of a planet. He saw the determination in Vaxin's eyes, the same look he'd seen when Vaxin had carried him out of a burning dropship on Eris 4. Silas lowered the weapon. Contracts void, Silas muttered into his comms. The asset has gone rogue, full retreat. Silas, no, Sable screamed. But the mercenaries were already falling back, disappearing into the neon mist. Silas gave Vaxin a sharp military nod, a final goodbye to a brother he no longer understood, and vanished. Vaxin didn't watch him go. He was focused on the tower. With a final guttural roar, he tore the cooling coil from its housing. The explosion threw him backward, a shockwave of light and sound that leveled the Cypress drones and sent a ripple through the entire obsidian mire. The siphons went dark. The silence that followed was absolute. Vaxin lay in the water, his chest smoking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He felt the seed settling back into its slow, rhythmic hum. It was damaged, but it was still there. Vaxin! He felt hands on him, soft hands. Lyra was kneeling in the mud, her face streaked with soot and tears. She pulled his head onto her lap, her hands glowing as she tried to weave the shattered skin of his chest back together. You did it, she whispered. The towers are down. The Enclave is safe. Vaxin looked at her, his vision blurry. She said Megan wasn't real. Leora paused, her ears drooping. She looked at him with a profound, aching sadness. I know, Vaxin. I saw it in the echo when you grounded the tower. I have nothing, Vaxin rasped, a single tear cutting through the grime on his face. Leora squeezed his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. You have us, Vaxin Carr. You chose us. And on this planet, that is more powerful than any bloodline. Vaxin closed his eyes, the warmth of her hand the only thing keeping him from drifting into the void. He had lost his past, his daughter, and his humanity. But as the Silver Veil warriors gathered around them, their silver armor reflecting the gentle light of the moon, he realized he had found something he never thought he'd have again. A reason to stay. The immediate aftermath of the breach was a frantic, desperate struggle for preservation. The Silver Veil Enclave had survived the Alabaster Hand's first assault, but the cost was etched into the very walls of the stronghold. The living roots were scarred and gray, the bioluminescent moss flickering like a dying candle. The warriors moved with heavy steps, their armor dented and dull. Vaxin sat in a darkened corner of the medical bay, his back against a pillar of petrified wood. Leora had finished the initial weave, but the core seed was still hot in his chest, a dull, pulsing ache that felt like a bruise on his soul. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the AI subroutine of Megan, a perfect digital lie that had governed his life for a decade. You look like a man who's been hollowed out, a voice said. Vaxin looked up. Xanthia was standing there, her arm in a fresh sling, her copper fur messy and singed. She didn't look like the fierce Vanguard officer anymore. She looked like a survivor. I'm fine, Xanthia, Vaxin said, his voice a dry rasp. You are not, she replied, sitting on the floor next to him. She didn't ask for permission. The commander says we are preparing to retreat deeper into the subcore. The Alabaster Hand will return. Sable does not accept defeat. She only reloads. I should go, Vaxin said, staring at his hands. Silas and his mercs. They only came here for me. If I leave, maybe they'll stop hunting you. Xanthia snorted, a sharp, cynical sound. You think too much of your own importance, human. Sable wants the seed, yes, but she wants the purge more. She wants a Xylo 4 that only remembers her version of the truth. Even if you walk into the mire and let the stalkers have you, she will still come for us. We are the witnesses to the alliance she wants to erase. I'm not part of an alliance, Vaxen said. I'm a mistake, a piece of corporate property that forgot who its owner was. Xanthia reached out and tapped the center of his chest, her clawed finger clinking against the bandage. Property does not scream when it sees its brother. Property does not bleed for a scout who is very crunchy. You are a man who is terrified because the walls of your cage have finally fallen down. My cage was a daughter who loved me, Vaxen roared, standing up. The medical bay went silent as the other Lupari looked toward them. My cage was a future. Now I have a heart made of clockwork and a planet that wants to eat my brain. What do you want from me, Xanthia? You want me to be a hero? I'm just a guy who's tired of being lied to. Xanthia didn't flinch. She stood up, her ears swiveling to catch the sound of his ragged breathing. I want you to choose, not because you are the anchor, not because Aegis Horizon built you. I want you to choose because we are here, and we are real, and we are dying. She turned and walked away, leaving Vaxen standing in the flickering amber light. He spent the next few hours wandering the enclave. He saw the children of the Silver Veil, small, tufted-eared pups who looked at him with wide, curious eyes. They didn't see a machine or a monster. They saw the tall, heavy stranger who had made the screaming towers go quiet. He saw the elders whispering over the route maps, their faces lined with a worry that spanned centuries. He eventually found himself in the subcore, the lowest level of the enclave where the ancient machinery of the first anchors was housed. It was a place of shadows and humming brass pipes, where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and oil. Vaxin, he turned. Leora was standing by a central console, her hands moving over a holographic projection of the planet's neural network. She looked small against the vast, shifting patterns of light. We've found the source of the distortion, Leora said, her voice trembling slightly. Sable didn't just have the siphons. She's found a way to access the echo stream directly. She's rewriting the history of the first contact. She can do that? Vaxen asked, walking toward the console. The echo is memory, Vaxen, Leora explained. If you change the input at the source, the root heart shrine, you change the reality of everyone who is connected to the mire. In 3 days, the convergence will reach its peak. If Sable is at the altar, she can broadcast a new truth to every Lupari on Xylo 4. She can make them believe that humans slaughtered our ancestors. She can turn the planet into a weapon of genocide. Vaxen looked at the holographic map. He saw the red pulsing dot of the shrine, located in the most hostile part of the obsidian mires. Then we go there. We stop her. It's not that simple, Leora said. She looked at him, her amber eyes shimmering with a liquid iridescence. To stop her, someone has to act as the stabilizer. Someone has to hold the true memory of the Alliance while the shrine is open. It will be a psychic battle, Vaxen, a war of wills. And the stabilizer, they will be exposed to the full, raw power of the obsidian heart. And a Lupari can't do it, Vaxen stated. No, Leora whispered. We are too sensitive. The weight of the world's memory would crush our minds in seconds. But you, the seed in your chest was designed to carry that weight. Aegis Horizon didn't build it for you to be a hero, Vaxen. They built it so they could one day use a human to control the planet's resources. You were meant to be their interface, their master key. Vaxen let out a long, slow breath. So I was built to be a colonizer's tool, and now you're asking me to be a savior's tool instead. Leora stepped closer. She didn't touch him this time. She gave him the space to breathe. I am not asking you to be a tool, Vaxen. I am asking you to be a man who decides what his heart is for. Aegis gave you the hardware. Sable wants to give you the script. But you have the choice. Vaxen looked at the console. He saw the faces of his past, the soldiers he had killed, the sergeant who had betrayed him, the daughter who was a ghost. Then he looked at Leora. He remembered the feeling of her hand on his side, the warmth that wasn't a simulation. If I do this, Vaxen said, if I go to the shrine and act as the stabilizer, what happens to me? Leora's silence was the answer. I won't survive it, will I? Vaxen asked, a strange sense of peace settling over him. The feedback, it'll burn out the seed, it'll burn out me. There is a chance, Leora said, her voice breaking. If we can ground the energy fast enough, if we can… Leora, Vaxin interrupted softly. Don't lie to me. I've had enough of those for one lifetime. She looked away, a single tear falling onto the obsidian floor. The probability of survival is less than 10%. The neural load is too high for a biological brain to sustain. Vaxin nodded. He looked around the subcore, at the ancient brass pipes and the pulsing roots. He thought about the life he had lived, a life of war, of hiding, of being a ghost in a machine. He thought about the daughter he had loved, even if she was just a subroutine. Every time I wanted to give up, something small kept me going, he thought. A memory, a promise, a stubborn hope. You know, Vaxin said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. I spent 10 years thinking I was protecting Megan. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I sent enough money, I could make a world for her where she didn't have to see what I saw. He looked at Leora. Maybe I can still do that. Not for Megan, but for Kiri, for the pups in the Enclave, for you. Vaxin, no, Leora whispered. There has to be another way. There isn't, Vaxin said, and we both know it. Sable is going to turn this planet into a graveyard. I'm the only one who can keep the gates closed. He reached out and took her hand. This time he was the one who initiated the touch. Her palm was soft, her fur silky against his rough skin. The warmth was real. The heartbeat was real. Family isn't just blood, Leora, Vaxin said, quoting a piece of wisdom he had only just begun to understand. It's the people you choose to stand with when the world is burning. I'm choosing you. The alarm blared again, the deep, resonant boom of the Enclave's outer sensors. The alabaster hand was back, and this time, they weren't just bringing siphons. They were bringing the heavy artillery. Prepare the skimmers, Vaxin said, his voice dropping into the cold, tactical tone of a commander. We're going to the shrine. We're going to give Sable the ending she deserves. As he walked toward the armory, Vaxin felt the core seat in his chest. It was pulsing a steady, rhythmic beat. Thump, 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 thump. It didn't feel like a machine anymore. It felt like a promise. He was a human. He was a machine. He was a father to a ghost. But as he checked the edge of his blade and looked at the warriors who were now his sisters and brothers, he knew he was something else. He was the anchor, and he wasn't going to break. The deeper they ventured into the obsidian mires, the more the world of Xylo 4 ceased to be a physical place and started to become a psychological one. The teal-violet twilight of the outer marshes had given way to a thick, suffocating blackness that seemed to swallow the light of their skimmers' lanterns. Here the mud was no longer just sludge. It was a pressurized sea of liquid memory, and the air was so saturated with bioluminescent spores that every breath Vaxin Carr took felt like inhaling 1,000 whispered secrets. Stay within the frequency of the anchor, Commander Mice commanded over the short-range comms. She stood at the prow of the leading skimmer, her silver armor now caked in black grime, her double-bladed staff glowing with a protective amber pulse. The deep mires do not tolerate the presence of the ungrounded. If you drift, the echo will pull you under. Vaxin sat at the center of the middle skimmer, flanked by Leora and Kiri. He could feel the core seat in his chest vibrating with a terrifying intensity. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a roar that resonated in his bones. Every time his pulse spiked, the water around the skimmer rippled in perfect geometric patterns. He was no longer just a passenger. He was the engine and the shield. It's getting louder, Kiri whispered, her tufted ears flattened against her skull. She was clutching her thermal bow so tightly her knuckles were white. The voices, they're not just memories anymore. They're calling out to us. Don't listen to them, Kiri, Leora said, her hands resting on Vaxin's shoulders. She was acting as his secondary stabilizer, her echo-weave strands interlaced with his jacket to help manage the thermal load. Focus on the rhythm of the skimmer. Focus on the feeling of the wind. But Vaxin knew it wasn't that simple. For him, the noise wasn't a roar of alien voices. It was one voice. Dad? It was faint, like a radio signal drifting from a distant galaxy. Dad, I finished the design for the central atrium. It's all glass, just like you said. When are you coming to see it? Vaxin's grip on the railing tightened until the metal groaned. He knew it was a lie. Silas had told him, and the logic of it was undeniable. Megan was an AI subroutine, a carrot on a stick used by Aegis Horizon to keep their biological asset from going into shock. But knowing it was a lie didn't stop the way his chest ached. It didn't stop the memory of her imaginary laughter or the smell of a lavender soap she had never actually used. "Vaccin, your heart rate is climbing," Leora warned, her voice tight with concern. "You're starting to overheat." "I'm fine," Vaccin hissed through gritted teeth. Suddenly, the mist ahead of them parted. It didn't drift away. It transformed. The twisted black roots of the cypress drones were replaced by soaring spires of glass and steel. The murky water became a clean, stone-paved plaza. The sky above, once a bruise of violet, was now a brilliant, terraformed blue. They were in the heart of the Mars colony. "What is this?" Kiri gasped, standing up and staring at the holographic cityscape. "Is this a dream?" "It's a projection," Mai shouted, her voice distorted by the psychic interference. "Sable is using the root heart to pull the strongest memories from the anchor. It's a sensory trap. Do not leave the skimmer." But for Vaccin, it was more than a projection. The skimmer felt like it had vanished. He felt the solid, warm ground of the plaza beneath his boots. He felt the sun on his face. And then he saw her. A young woman, perhaps 25, stood by a fountain. She was wearing a lab coat, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She turned, her face lighting up with a smile that felt more real than the obsidian mud he had lived in for a decade. "Dad, you made it!" "Megan," Vaccin whispered. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out. "Vaccin, no!" Leora's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "It's the echo. Stay with us." Megan walked toward him, her footsteps clicking on the stone. "Look at you, Dad. You look so tired. Why are you still in that dirty jacket? Why are you holding a knife? Come inside. We have the celebration dinner ready. Silas is there, and the Admiral. Everyone is waiting for the hero of RS4. She reached for his hand. Her fingers looked soft. They didn't have claws. They weren't covered in silver fur. They were human. They were his. "Is it really you?" Vaccin asked, his vision blurring with tears. Silas said, "He said you weren't real." "Silas was always jealous, Dad," Megan said, her voice a soothing balm. "He's still out there in the cold, but you don't have to be. Just let go of the anchor. Let the machine take the weight. You've done enough. You've saved the world. Now just be my father again." Vaccin felt the core seat in his chest beginning to relax. The roar was fading into a gentle rhythmic hum. It would be so easy. He could step off this skimmer into the arms of his daughter and let the darkness of Xylo 4 swallow him whole. He wouldn't have to feel the pain of his scars anymore. He wouldn't have to be a weapon. He could just exist. But as he looked into Megan's eyes, he saw something. Or rather, he didn't see something. Her eyes were perfect, clear, bright, and full of unconditional love. But they didn't have the fire of Xenthia's defiance. They didn't have the mischievous spark of Kiri's curiosity. And they didn't have the deep, aching empathy of Leora's gaze. Megan's love was a mirror. It only gave back what he wanted to see. It cost him nothing, and in return, it changed nothing. "Vaccin, please!" Leora was screaming now. He felt her hands grabbing his arm, pulling him back. "Kiri is fading. The siphon is hitting us because you're letting the shield down." Vaccin looked past the perfect Megan. He saw the reality. The skimmer was tilting. Kiri was on her knees, her nose bleeding, her golden eyes rolling back in her head. Mace was fighting off a swarm of shadow mites that were feeding on the leaking energy of the anchor. And Leora was glowing with a desperate, blinding light, pouring her own life force into him to keep his heart from stopping. She was dying to save a man who was falling in love with a ghost. "Dad?" Megan asked, her voice turning sharp, demanding. "What are you doing? Come back to me." Vaccin looked at his daughter one last time. He felt the grief, a crushing tidal wave of it. He loved her. He loved the idea of her. He loved the father he had tried to be for her. "I'm sorry, Megan," Vaccin whispered, "but you're not the one who needs me." He didn't pull away. He didn't run. He reached into his chest, metaphorically and physically, and grabbed the connection to the city. He didn't ground the energy this time. He used it. "I choose the ones who bleed," Vaccin roared. He slammed his void edge into the stone plaza beneath his feet. The kinetic shockwave didn't break glass. It broke the illusion. The spires of Mars shattered into shards of black mist. The blue sky was torn away like a cheap curtain, revealing the screaming, violet storm of the deep mires. Vaxan was back on the skimmer. He was gasping, his chest smoking, his hands charred. But the shield was back. The shadow mites vanished in a burst of blue energy. Megan was the last to go. She didn't scream. She just looked at him with a profound sadness as she dissolved into a cloud of glowing spores. "I love you, kiddo," Vaxan whispered to the empty air. "Build them high." He collapsed back onto the seat. Leora caught him, her tears falling onto his scorched hands. "You're back. You stayed." "I'm a bridge, remember?" Vaxan rasped, his eyes finding Mace at the prow. "And a bridge that only goes to a ghost isn't much use to anyone." "The shrine," Mace called out, her voice filled with a new, somber respect. "It's just ahead. We've passed the threshold." Through the darkness, the Root Heart Shrine finally appeared. It didn't look like a building. It looked like a god of metal and bone that had fallen to earth and been buried up to its neck. It towered over the caldera, its massive, rib-like spires clawing at the sky, pulsing with a light that felt like the heartbeat of the universe. The pilgrimage was over. The war for the soul of Xylo 4 was about to begin. The base of the Root Heart Shrine was a graveyard of civilizations. As the skimmers docked against the massive, petrified roots, Vaxan saw the wreckage of centuries. There were Lupari ships from the first contact, their silver hulls now green with toxic moss. There were human terraforming pods, crushed like soda cans by the sheer pressure of the planet's growth. And everywhere, there were bones. "The shrine is a filter," Leora said, her voice a mere whisper as they stepped onto the solid ground of the plateau. "It draws in the memory of everything that dies on Xylo 4. But it only keeps what is essential. The rest, it discards here." Vaxan looked at the towering structure. The entrance was a yawning maw of obsidian and brass, guarded by two massive statues of first anchors, one Lupari, one human, their hands joined together to support the weight of the archway. It was a testament to a peace that had been forgotten, a truth that Sable was currently trying to erase. "The alabaster hand is already inside," Zenthia said, checking the charge on her staff. "I can hear the resonance. They've reached the altar of truth." "We move in a diamond formation," Mace commanded. "Vaxan at the center. Leora, you stay locked to his frequency. If Sable tries another projection, Vaxan is the only one who can cut through it. Do not engage the mercenaries unless you have to. We are here for the heart." They entered the shrine. The interior was a cathedral of biomechanical engineering. Veins of glowing liquid flowed through translucent pipes in the walls, and the floor was a network of silver grates over a bottomless abyss of pulsing light. The air hummed with a sound like 1,000 voices singing in harmony, a sound that was beautiful and terrifyingly loud. As they ascended the central spiral staircase, they were met with the first of Sable's elites. These were not warriors, they were zealots. They didn't use staves, they had integrated echo siphons directly into their armor. They looked like walking husks, their fur fallen out, their skin glowing with a sickly violet radiation. "For the purity!" the first zealot screamed, launching themselves at the group. The battle in the narrow corridor was a claustrophobic nightmare. Vaxan couldn't use his full power without risking the structural integrity of the stairs. He had to rely on his void edge and the brutal, close-quarters combat skills Silas had taught him. He parried a strike from a zealot's jagged blade, feeling the siphon on their chest, trying to pull the core seed right out of his ribs. He gritted his teeth, the seed pushing back with a pulse of blue light that threw the attacker backward. "Vaxan, behind you!" Kiri yelled. She fired a thermal arrow that hissed past Vaxan's ear, striking a second zealot who was dropping from the ceiling. The attacker erupted in a cloud of spores, but more were coming. "Go!" Zenthia roared, placing herself at the center of the stairs. She planted her staff, and a wall of orange flame erupted, blocking the path of the advancing zealots. "I'll hold them here. Get the anchor to the altar." "Zenthia, no!" Leora cried out. "There's too many." "I am a vanguard of the Silver Veil," Zenthia shouted, her voice echoing through the cathedral. She turned her head, looking at Vaxan with a fierce, bloody grin. "You saved me in the muck, human. Now go fix the world so I can have a beer when I get back." "Zenthia," Vaxan started. "Move," Mace ordered, grabbing Vaxan's arm and pulling him up the stairs. "She knows her duty. Do yours." They left Zenthia behind, the sound of her battle cries fading into the hum of the shrine. Vaccine felt a cold stone in his stomach. He had spent his life losing people to wars that didn't matter. But this was different. Xanthia wasn't dying for a flag or a paycheck. She was dying for a choice. They reached the top level. The chamber of the root heart was a vast open space where the walls were made of pure, transparent thatch on. Beyond the glass, the entire obsidian mire was visible, a sea of neon teal pulsing in the darkness. In the center of the room was the altar, a massive clockwork sphere that was the source of the planet's neural network. High Matron Sable stood before the altar. She had Elder Thalrus suspended in a cage of violet energy. The old Lupari was unconscious, his silver fur matted with blood. Standing around the altar were the remaining Aegis mercenaries. Silas was not among them. "You are late, Anchor," Sable said, not turning around. She was placing her hands on the sphere, her white fur standing on end as the energy of the shrine flowed through her. "The convergence has begun. The echo is already shifting." "Let him go, Sable," Vaccine said, stepping into the center of the chamber. His core seed was screaming now, the light from his chest illuminating the entire room. "You can't rewrite the truth. The people saw what happened at the gates. They felt the connection." "They felt a lie," Sable shrieked, turning to face him. Her face was a mask of fanatical rage, her eyes glowing with a violet fire. "They felt the pollution of a human mind. But I am the High Matron. I am the voice of Xylo 4. When I am finished, the very mud will forget that your species ever set foot on this soil. You will be a myth, a story told to frighten children." She signaled to the mercenaries. They didn't fire. They stepped back, revealing a central terminal. "Vaccine car!" A digital voice boomed from the shrine speakers. It was cold, corporate, and impossibly familiar. "This is Aegis Horizon High Command. You are in violation of Asset Management Protocol 7. Return the seed to the terminal immediately, or we will initiate the Purge Command." Vaccine stopped. "The Purge Command?" "It's a failsafe, Vaccine," Leora whispered, her face turning pale. "They built it into the seed. If the asset goes rogue, they can detonate the core. It won't just kill you. It will send a feedback loop through the shrine that will wipe every living brain on Xylo 4. It's their scorched earth policy." "You see?" Sable laughed, her voice hysterical. "Your masters would rather kill us all than lose their tool. Join me, Vaccine. Give me the seed. I can override their command. I can use the shrine's power to shield the Lupari. Only the humans will die. Only the pollutants." Vaccine looked at the terminal. He looked at Sable. He looked at the dying elder. And then he looked at Leora and Mice. He was at the center of a three-way tug of war. Aegis wanted him as a tool. Sable wanted him as a sacrifice. And the planet just wanted him to be the anchor. What is the one thing that keeps you moving forward when everything feels impossible? Vaccine remembered his choice in the mist. He remembered the feeling of Megan's hand and why he had let it go. He realized that for his whole life, he had been waiting for someone else to tell him who he was. A soldier, a mechanic, a father, an anchor. "I'm not a tool," Vaccine said, his voice quiet but carrying over the roar of the shrine. "And I'm not a sacrifice." He walked toward the altar. The Aegis mercenaries raised their weapons, but Sable waved them back. She thought he was surrendering. "I am Vaccine Carr," he said, stepping onto the platform. "I am a man who failed his daughter. I am a man who was betrayed by his brothers. And I am a man who found a family in a swamp that didn't owe him anything." He looked at Leora. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "I told you I was too stubborn to die, didn't I?" Vaccine didn't go to the terminal. He didn't go to Sable. He walked straight to the root heart sphere and plunged his hands into the liquid light. The scream that left his lungs wasn't human. It was the sound of a world waking up. The feedback hit him like a supernova. His nervous system was stripped bare, his memories laid out like a map. He felt the Purge command arriving from the Aegis satellites, a jagged black code meant to end everything. He felt Sable's fanatical hatred, a violet rot trying to poison the stream. And then he felt the others. He felt Leora's hand on his back. He felt Kiri's hope. He felt Mace's respect. He felt Xanthia's sacrifice. He didn't fight the Purge. He didn't fight Sable. He became the anchor. He pulled the black code and the violet rod into himself, and he transformed them. He used his own grief for Megan, the most real, most human thing he possessed, as a filter. He showed the shrine the truth of his loss, the truth of his choice, and the truth of the love he had found in the darkness. The purge command hit the grief and shattered. The violet rot hit the love and dissolved. The root heart sphere turned from violet to a brilliant, pure white. A shockwave of clarity erupted from the shrine, traveling through the pipes, through the roots, through the mud, and into the minds of every living thing on Xylo 4. It wasn't a broadcast of words. It was a broadcast of feeling. Everyone on the planet felt Vaxin's choice. They felt the cost of it, and they felt the undeniable truth that blood was not the only thing that made a family. Sable was thrown back by the force of the revelation. She hit the glass wall, staring at Vaxin with horror. Her narrative was gone. The world knew the truth. Vaxin remained at the altar, his body glowing so brightly he was a silhouette of white fire. He could feel the seed in his chest melting, its work finished. He was dying. He could feel his mind starting to flake away, his sense of self dissolving into the planet's memory. Vaxin! Leora's voice was the only thing holding him together. Leora! Vaxin gasped, his vision failing. I held it. I held the line. You did, Vaxin, she whispered, her hands on his face. You saved us all. The spires, Vaxin mumbled, his mind drifting back to Mars. Tell Megan. I built them. I finally built them. The light faded. The shrine settled into a calm, gentle pulse. The war was over. Vaxin Carr fell into Leora's arms, his chest silent, his eyes closed. The anchor had held, but the bridge had finally reached the other side. The silence that followed the collapse of the white fire was not the heavy, suffocating silence of the deep mires. It was the silence of a held breath finally released. The root heart shrine, once a jagged monolith of cold iron and terrifying power, now stood as a quiet sentinel of glass and glowing amber. The violet rot of High Matron Sable's influence had been purged, replaced by a rhythmic, soothing thrum that felt like the purr of a sleeping predator finally tamed. Leora knelt in the center of the altar, her hands trembling as she held Vaxin Carr's head against her chest. His body was cold, the shimmering translucent bandages on his chest torn away to reveal a heart that no longer pulsed with blue light. The core seed was dark, a dead hunk of obsidian glass embedded in his flesh. Vaxin, she whispered, her voice cracking. Vaxin, come back. You promised. You said you were too stubborn. Behind them, the chamber was a scene of somber resolution. The Aegis mercenaries had retreated into the mists, their contracts broken by the very technology they had come to reclaim. Commander Mace and the surviving Silverveil warriors were rounding up the disoriented Alabaster zealots. There was no more fighting. The psychic shockwave Vaxin had unleashed, the bridge of empathy, had left everyone on the plateau incapable of violence. You cannot strike a person when you have just spent 10 minutes living inside their soul, feeling their grief as if it were your own. Sable sat against the far glass wall, her bone-white armor cracked, her eyes wide and vacant. She wasn't dead, but she was defeated in a way that no blade could achieve. She had seen Vaxin's truth. She had felt the hollow ache of the daughter he had lost, and the fierce, protective love he felt for the Lupari pups. Her narrative of human pollution had been incinerated by the raw reality of his sacrifice. He isn't breathing, Kiri whimpered, crawling toward them on her good leg. Her tufted ears were drooping, wet with tears. Leora, use the echo silk. Heal him. You're the best weaver we have. I can't, Leora sobbed, her hands hovering over Vaxin's still heart. The seed. It's not just a pump anymore. It was the anchor. If it's dead, his body has no reason to continue. The weave won't take if there's no frequency to latch onto. Then we give him ours, a raspy voice commanded. Elder Thalorus was sitting up, leaning against the base of the altar. His milky eyes were still clouded, but he looked stronger than he had in years. The surge of clarity that had saved the planet had also revitalized the old scholar. Elder, Mice asked, stepping forward. The human did not just ground the energy, Thalorus said, his voice vibrating with a new authority. He offered himself as a permanent ground wire. He didn't just save us, he joined us. He is part of the Echo now. If you want him to live, you must remind his flesh that it belongs here. Thalorus gestured to the surrounding Lupari. Every one of you, place your hands on him. Not as warriors, not as subjects. Place your hands on him as family. Give him the memory of the life he saved. One by one they came. Mace was the first. She knelt beside Vaxen, her silver-armored hand resting on his scarred shoulder. "You are a pain in the neck, human," she muttered, her voice thick with emotion. "But the silver veil does not leave its own behind." Kiri placed her small, furred hand over his wrist. "I still owe you dinner, and you haven't seen me win an archery tournament yet." Zenthia, who had limped into the room supported by two guards, her fur matted with the blood of the zealots she had fought on the stairs, placed her hand over his boots. "Choose, Vaxen," she whispered. "Choose to stay." Finally, Leora placed both her hands directly over the dark seat in his chest. She didn't try to weave a complex medical spell. She simply closed her eyes and projected a single powerful image. The two of them sitting on the porch of his old shack, watching the neon mists of Xylo 4 without fear. The room grew quiet. For a long minute, there was only the sound of the wind whistling through the rib spires of the shrine. Then a spark. Deep within the dead obsidian of the core seed, a tiny pinprick of amber light flickered. It wasn't the cold, mechanical blue of Aegis Horizon. It was the warm, organic glow of the Lupari echo. Thump! Vaxen's chest gave a sudden, violent heave. He gasped, his eyes snapping open. They weren't brown, and they weren't silver. They were a deep, vibrant amber, the color of the Lupari moons. "Leora," he wheezed, his voice sounding like it had been dragged through gravel. "I'm here," she laughed through her tears, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "I'm here, you idiot." Vaxen looked around the circle of faces. Silver, russet, copper, and white. He felt the warmth of their hands. He felt the hum of the shrine beneath him. But most importantly, he felt the weight in his chest. The seed was still there, but it didn't feel like a heavy machine anymore. It felt like a part of him, a shared heart. "The spires," Vaxen mumbled, his mind still half lost in the transition. "Are they still there?" "The spires of Mars are gone, Vaxen," Thalris said gently, leaning forward to touch Vaxen's forehead. "But the spires of Xylo 4 are standing, and for the first time in 400 years, they are open to us all." Vaxen let out a long, slow breath. He looked at his hands. They were still scarred, still rough, but the tremors were gone. He looked at the mirror-polished floor of the shrine. The reflection looking back was not a soldier. It was not a ghost. It was a man, sitting among his family in a world that finally had a future. 6 months had passed since the night of the White Convergence. The Obsidian Myers had undergone a transformation that defied every corporate projection made by Aegis Horizon. The toxic gases were now recognized as a complex pheromonal language, a biological internet that shared nutrients and data across the hemisphere. The aggressive flora had settled into a protective canopy, shielding the new settlements from the harsh solar winds of the outer system. Vaxen Carr sat on the porch of the bridge house, a structure built from a fusion of repurposed ship hull plating and living ironwood. It stood on the border of the Hush Marsh, exactly halfway between the human colony of Greybank and the Silvervale Enclave. He was no longer a scavenger, he was the arbiter, a role created by the new Joint Council of Humans in Lupari. Today the air smelled of ozone and crushed peppermint. Vaxen was busy at his workbench, his large calloused hands moving with a new kind of precision. He wasn't fixing an engine. He was carving a wooden flute for a Lupari pup who had lost his father in the breach. "The envoy from the Frontier Council is arriving," Leora said, stepping out onto the porch. She wore a tunic of dark silk, and her russet fur was lustrous in the morning twilight. She carried 2 mugs of spiced root tea. "They want to discuss the new trade route through the deep mires. They're still nervous about the voices in the mud." Vaxen took a mug, the warmth seeping into his fingers. He looked out at the horizon, where a group of human miners and Lupari scouts were working together to clear a path for a new irrigation line. "Tell them the voices are just the planet's way of saying hello. If they stop trying to drill into the neural nodes, the planet will stop trying to eat their drills." Leora sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You've changed, Vaxen. You talk to the trees more than you talk to me some days." "I'm just listening," Vaxen said, a soft smile touching his lips. "It's a lot quieter in my head than it used to be. The seed, it doesn't shout anymore. It just hums." He looked down at his chest. The scar was still there, a perfect circle over his heart, but the skin around it had turned a pale, shimmering silver. He didn't need the Megan subroutine to feel whole. He had found a different kind of legacy. Later that afternoon, a small, dark shape dropped from the rafters of the porch. "Boo!" Kiri shouted, landing perfectly on her feet. She was wearing a new set of scout armor, and her tufted ears were adorned with silver rings, a mark of her promotion to a full Pathfinder. Vaxin didn't even flinch. "You're getting slower, kid. I heard your tail hit the shingles 3 seconds ago." "Liar!" Kiri laughed, hopping onto the railing. "I was a ghost. You only knew I was there because you're a biological cheat code." She reached into her pack and pulled out a battered, familiar object. "Look what I found in the old debris field near the crash site." It was a small, rusted locket. Vaxin's breath caught. He opened it with a trembling thumb. Inside was a faded physical photograph of a woman and a child. A real photograph. Not a digital projection, not a corporate lie. "That was my wife, Sarah," Vaxin said, his voice a whisper. "And that was the real Megan. Before the wars, before everything." Kiri went quiet, her mischievous energy vanishing. "She looks like she had a good laugh." "She did," Vaxin said, tracing the faces with his finger. "She was an architect. She wanted to build things that would last 1,000 years." He looked at the photograph, and then he looked at the bridge house. He looked at the irrigation lines, the joint settlements, and the peaceful Lupari warriors who were now guarding the human miners. He wasn't sending credits to a ghost anymore. He was building the spires Megan had dreamed of, not out of glass on Mars, but out of trust on Xylo 4. Vaxin stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. He looked into the black water of the marsh, which had once been his greatest enemy. The reflection looking back was a man who had been broken into 1,000 pieces and put back together by the hands of strangers. He saw the scars, the silver fur on his chest, and the amber light in his eyes. He didn't see a soldier. He didn't see a machine. He saw a father. "I spent 12 years in the Nebula Wars learning how to dismantle the world, piece by jagged piece. I thought survival was a solitary act, a wall you built around yourself out of iron and indifference. When I arrived on Xylo 4, I was just a ghost looking for a place to haunt. I thought my heart was a cold engine, and my only connection to humanity was a memory of a daughter that turned out to be a corporate algorithm. But in the mud of the obsidian mires, I learned that the architecture of a soul isn't built from bloodlines or data streams. It's built from the moments you choose to stay when every instinct tells you to run. It's built from the hands that hold you when you're screaming into the void, and the people who look at your scars and see a map instead of a warning. I realized that I wasn't saved because I was an asset. I was saved because I reached out. I used to think family was something you were born into, a debt of biology you could never fully pay. Now I understand that family is the most radical choice a person can make. It's the decision to say, your pain is mine and my strength is yours, regardless of the skin we wear or the stars we come from. I might have a heart made of clockwork and ancient stone, but it beats with a truth that no corporation can own. I am Vaxin Carr, and I am finally truly home. I spent a decade sending my love into a void, chasing a perfect memory of a daughter who didn't exist, only to find a world of people right in front of me who were willing to bleed to keep me whole. It makes me wonder how many of us are so busy mourning the lives we thought we were supposed to have, or chasing the perfect versions of ourselves, that we miss the family that's already standing in the mud with us. If you could let go of the ghosts of your past today, who are the people in your life you would choose to stand with? Who is your chosen family, the ones who stayed when they didn't have to? Vaxin closed the locket and tucked it into his pocket, a quiet peace settling over his features. He turned back to the porch, picking up the wooden flute and beginning to carve again, the amber light of the moons catching the steady, sure movement of his hands. Somewhere in the deep marsh, a mire-stalker let out a low, melodic call, and for the first time, Vaxin didn't reach for his knife. He just listened,